A broke comedian sits alone on a dark hilltop, tears streaming down his face as he stares at the city lights below. In his trembling hands he holds a check made out to himself for $10 million. His family is homeless. His father just lost everything, and this piece of paper is all he has left to believe in. What happened next would defy every rule of logic and probability, creating one of Hollywood's most impossible success stories. But before that check would come true, he would have to survive something far worse than poverty, something that would break most people completely. And the twist? The universe was already listening. This is the story of Jim Carrey, and it's far more painful and beautiful than you ever imagined. Long before the $10 million check, before the mansion and the fame, there was a small house in Toronto, Canada. Inside that house lived a family of 6, barely holding on. Percy Carrey worked as an accountant, but his real dream was to be a musician, a saxophone player. An artist trapped in a grey suit, filing numbers for people who would never remember his name. His wife, Kathleen, struggled with chronic pain and depression. Their 4 children, Patricia, John, Rita, and the youngest, Jim, learned early that life was fragile, that dreams were dangerous, that safety meant settling. But young Jim was different. Even at 8 years old, he would put on shows for his family after dinner, transforming their living room into a stage. He would contort his face into impossible expressions, making his exhausted father laugh for the first time in weeks. In those moments, Jim discovered something powerful. He could change reality with his imagination. His father noticed. Percy would watch his youngest son perform and see a spark he recognized in himself. The spark he had extinguished years ago when he chose security over passion. "Don't make my mistake, son," Percy would think, but never say out loud, "Not yet." Jim's childhood was a mix of magic and worry. At school, he was the class clown, the kid who could make teachers laugh even while being sent to the principal's office. But at home, he watched his mother disappear into her illness, watched his father's shoulders slump a little more each year. He learned that laughter was a shield, a survival tool, a way to keep the darkness at bay. And then, when Jim was 12 years old, everything collapsed. It happened on a Tuesday. Percy Carrey came home early from work, his face pale, his hands shaking. The company was downsizing. After decades of loyalty, of sacrificing his dreams for stability, he was let go, just like that. Jim watched his father sit at the kitchen table, staring at nothing. Percy had done everything right. He had been responsible, he had played it safe, and it meant nothing. Within months, they lost the house. The family moved into a van, then eventually a Volkswagen camper, parking in relatives' driveways, in church parking lots, anywhere they could find space. Jim, now 13, would wake up with frost on the inside of the windows, his breath visible in the cold Canadian mornings, but the van was just where they slept. The real nightmare was the factory. To survive, the entire family took jobs as janitors and security guards at the Titan Wheels factory in Scarborough. After school, Jim would put on coveralls and clean toilets, mop floors, scrub grease off machinery. He was a teenager, watching his classmates go to parties and football games while he worked 8-hour shifts in a factory that smelled like chemicals and broken dreams. His hands would crack and bleed from the cleaning solutions. His back would ache. But worse than the physical pain was watching his father, this brilliant, talented man, reduced to mopping floors beside his own children. Percy's eyes had gone hollow. The spark was completely gone now. Jim made a promise to himself on those factory floors, between the industrial mops and the buzzing fluorescent lights. "This will not be my life. I will not let my dreams die. I will not play it safe." But promising is easy. Surviving is harder. At 15, Jim convinced his father to drive him to a comedy club in downtown Toronto. He had written jokes, practiced his impressions, rehearsed in mirrors for months. This would be his first real performance, his first step toward a different life. The club owner, a gruff man named Don, looked at this skinny teenager in borrowed clothes and laughed. "Kid, you're too young. Come back when you can legally drink in here." Jim's father, quiet Percy, who never fought for himself, stepped forward. "Just give him 5 minutes," he said. "If he's not good, we'll leave." Something in Percy's voice made Don pause. Maybe he saw the desperation. Maybe he saw himself. 5 minutes, Don agreed. "Don't waste them." Jim walked onto that stage, his heart hammering so hard he thought the audience could hear it. The spotlight was blinding. The crowd, 30 people scattered across dark tables, looked bored before he even opened his mouth. He launched into his material. Impressions of his teachers, stories about the factory, physical comedy that used his rubber face expressions. Nothing. Silence. A few awkward coughs. Someone got up to use the bathroom. It was dying. He was dying up there. Then something happened. Instead of following his rehearsed material, Jim let go. He started riffing about his actual life, the absurdity of living in a van, of cleaning toilets as homework, of his mother giving him haircuts with kitchen scissors because they couldn't afford a barber. He made his pain funny. He transformed his shame into power. The audience started laughing. Really laughing. By the end of his 7 minutes, he went over time. People were applauding. Don offered him a regular spot. And Percy Carey, standing in the back of that dark club, had tears in his eyes. His son had done it. His son had chosen the dream. Jim spent the next few years grinding through the Toronto comedy circuit, performing at small clubs, making barely enough to help his family. But Toronto felt too small. The dream was in Los Angeles, Hollywood, the place where impossible things happened to people brave enough or crazy enough to chase them. In 1983, at 19 years old, Jim packed everything he owned into a single suitcase and boarded a bus to Los Angeles. He had $500 in his pocket, and his father's final words in his head, "I believe in you, son. I always have." Los Angeles was brutal. Jim lived in a tiny apartment he could barely afford, surviving on peanut butter sandwiches and tap water. He would walk to auditions because he couldn't afford gas. He performed at every open mic, every showcase, every dive bar that would give him stage time. The rejections piled up. Casting directors would say he was too much, or not enough, or interesting but not right for this. Comedy clubs would pass on him. Agents wouldn't return his calls. Month after month, the answer was no. Jim started struggling with depression. The same darkness that had consumed his mother began creeping into his own mind. Some mornings he couldn't get out of bed. Some nights he would sit alone in his apartment, wondering if his father had been wrong, wondering if dreams were just elaborate ways to torture yourself. But he kept performing, because what else was there? Going back to Toronto meant admitting defeat, meant telling his father that safety was right after all, and Jim would rather die than deliver that message. Then came the night that changed everything. Though it didn't feel like it at the time. It was November 1985. Jim had been in Los Angeles for 2 years and had nothing to show for it. No big breaks, no agent, no money. He was driving his beat-up Toyota up Mulholland Drive, the winding road that overlooks Los Angeles, when he pulled over at a scenic overlook. The city lights spread out below him like a blanket of stars. Somewhere down there were movie studios, television networks, comedy clubs where legends were born. And here he was, nobody from nowhere, barely surviving. He broke down. Completely. The kind of crying where you can't catch your breath, where years of pain and fear come pouring out all at once. He thought about his father cleaning factory floors, about his mother's illness, about all the sacrifices his family made while he chased this impossible dream. Why was he doing this? What was the point? In that moment of total despair, something shifted inside Jim. Maybe it was desperation, maybe it was delusion, or maybe it was the last spark of hope refusing to die. He pulled out his checkbook, the one he used for his nearly empty bank account, and wrote himself a check. He dated it Thanksgiving 1995, 10 years in the future. And in the amount field, he wrote $10 million. In the memo line, "For acting services rendered." He stared at that check, this absurd piece of paper that represented everything he didn't have, everything that seemed impossible. And he made a decision. He would keep this check in his wallet. He would look at it every day. He would let it remind him of what he was fighting for, not the money itself, but the proof. The evidence that someone, even if it was just him, believed he was worth $10 million, that his dreams weren't just delusions, that his father's sacrifice meant something. Jim put that check in his wallet and drove home. He had no idea if it would work, no idea if the universe was listening. But he had nothing else left to believe in, so he chose to believe in this. The check became his secret, his talisman, his North Star. The check didn't make anything easier at first. Jim still auditioned, still failed, still struggled, but something had shifted in his energy. He started visualizing success with obsessive detail. He would drive up to beautiful houses in the Hollywood Hills and imagine himself living there. He would see his name in lights. He would rehearse acceptance speeches in his bathroom mirror. People thought he was crazy. Fellow comedians would see him talking to himself, practicing characters, living in his imagination. But Jim didn't care anymore. Sanity hadn't gotten him anywhere. Maybe madness was the answer. He got small roles, bit parts, a few lines on a sitcom here, a failed pilot there. Nothing that stuck. In 1990, he landed a spot on the sketch comedy show In Living Color. It was good, steady work, exposure, a real paycheck. But it wasn't the dream. It wasn't the check. Jim kept pushing. He developed characters, the fire marshal, the exotic pet store owner that showcased his physical comedy and fearlessness. He became known as the guy who would do anything for a laugh, the guy with no limits. But behind the scenes, he was still struggling. His marriage was falling apart. His depression would come in waves. And his father, his hero, was getting sick. In 1993, Jim got a call that made his blood run cold. His father, Percy, had cancer, advanced. The doctors gave him months, maybe a year. Jim flew back to Toronto, sat beside his father's hospital bed, and held his hand. Percy looked small now, fragile, nothing like the strong man who had driven him to that first comedy club. "Did I do the right thing, Dad?" Jim asked. "Chasing this? Missing so much time with you?" Percy squeezed his son's hand. "You did the only thing. You chose the dream. That's all I ever wanted for you, to not make my mistake." "What mistake?" "What mistake?" "Playing it safe," Percy whispered. "I thought security mattered. But you know what matters? Doing what you love. Failing at what you love is better than succeeding at something you hate. You taught me that, son." Jim returned to Los Angeles with a new fire. His father was dying. Time was running out. Every audition now felt like it was for Percy. Every performance was proof that his father's sacrifices hadn't been wasted. That's when he got the call. Morgan Creek Productions wanted him for a movie, a comedy about a pet detective. The script was absurd, ridiculous even, but the lead role was his if he wanted it. The pay, a fraction of what established stars made. Nothing close to 10 million, but it was a lead, a real movie, a chance. Jim took the role. The movie was called Ace Ventura, Pet Detective. Ace Ventura was supposed to be a small comedy, maybe a modest success if they were lucky. Instead, it became a phenomenon. Jim's fearless, physical, completely unhinged performance turned the movie into a surprise hit. It made $72 million domestically, massive for a comedy at that time. Suddenly, everyone wanted Jim Carrey. 3 months after Ace Ventura, The Mask was released. Another hit, even bigger. Then Dumb and Dumber at the end of 1994. 3 massive successes in 1 year. Hollywood had a new superstar. And Jim Carrey's price went through the roof. In 1995, Jim was offered the lead role in The Cable Guy. The studio was willing to pay whatever it took to secure him. His agents negotiated. The number climbed higher and higher. When the final offer came through, Jim stared at the contract in disbelief. $20 million. They were offering him $20 million for one movie. But Jim's mind went somewhere else. He opened his wallet, pulled out a worn, faded check dated Thanksgiving 1995, made out for $10 million. He had carried it every day for 10 years. Through the poverty, the rejections, the doubt, the check had come true. The universe had been listening. He called his father. "Dad, we did it." The check came true. Actually, it came true twice over. Percy's voice was weak now, the cancer stealing his strength. But Jim could hear the smile. "I never doubted you, son. Not for 1 second." Percy Carrey died on September 13, 1994, just as Jim's career was exploding. He got to see his son become successful, got to know that the dream was real, but he didn't get to see just how big it would become. Jim put the $10 million check in his father's casket. He buried it with Percy, a symbol of everything they had survived together, everything they had believed in when no one else did. At the funeral, Jim gave a eulogy that few people heard about, but those who were there never forgot. He talked about the factory, about the van, about a father who sacrificed his own dreams so his son could chase it. "My father taught me that you can fail at what you don't love," Jim said, his voice breaking. "So you might as well take a chance on doing what you love." He showed me that playing it safe is the most dangerous thing you can do, because safety doesn't exist. Security doesn't exist. All we have is right now, and what we choose to do with it. Today, Jim Carrey is worth over $150 million. He starred in dozens of films, made millions laugh, and became one of the most successful comedians in history. But if you ask him about success, he doesn't talk about the money or the fame. He talks about that check, about the night on Mulholland Drive when he had nothing but decided to believe in something anyway. About his father, the factory worker who sacrificed everything so his son could fly. Jim's story isn't really about manifestation or the law of attraction or positive thinking. Though those things played a role, it's about something deeper. It's about choosing to believe when belief seems impossible. It's about turning pain into power. It's about understanding that failure is only final if you stop moving. The check didn't magically make things happen. Jim still had to work harder than almost anyone, still had to survive rejection and poverty and doubt, still had to develop his craft over thousands of performances in front of audiences who didn't care. But the check did something crucial. It kept him going when nothing else could. It was a promise to himself. A commitment to the dream even when the dream seemed dead. Here's what they don't tell you about success stories. They're built on mountains of failure. Jim Carrey auditioned hundreds of times before Ace Ventura. He bombed on stage countless nights. He questioned himself every single day. The $10 million check wasn't magic. It was a symbol of radical faith in yourself, when the world gives you zero evidence that faith is justified. Most people never write that check. Not literally, but metaphorically. Most people decide that their current circumstances are their permanent reality, that dreams are for other people, for lucky people, for talented people. Jim Carrey wasn't particularly lucky. He came from poverty. His family was homeless. He had no connections, no advantages. What he had was a choice: surrender or fight. He chose to fight, and he did it by creating a future in his mind that was so vivid, so real, that it pulled him forward through all the pain. That's the secret. Not positive thinking, not manifestation magic, but the willingness to commit to a vision even when every logical, rational voice in your head says it's impossible. The check came true because Jim Carrey refused to let it be a lie. So here's the question you need to ask yourself. What's your $10 million check? What's the dream you're too afraid to write down? Because writing it down makes it real, and making it real means you'll have to admit if you fail. Jim Carrey wrote that check when he had nothing. When writing it seemed absurd. When the gap between where he was and where he wanted to be was so massive it was almost comical. And that's exactly when you're supposed to write it. Not when you're ready. Not when it makes sense. But when you're broken and desperate and out of options. That's when you write yourself the check. That's when you commit to the impossible. Because here's the final truth. You're going to fail at something anyway. Life is going to knock you down regardless. Your safety net is going to disappear. Your secure job is going to end. Your comfortable life is going to change. So if you're going to fail anyway, if you're going to struggle anyway, you might as well fail at something you love. You might as well struggle towards something that matters to you. Jim Carrey's father learned this lesson too late. He played it safe, chose security, and ended up cleaning factory floors beside his teenage children. The safe choice wasn't safe at all, but his son learned from that pain, transformed that pain, turned his father's regrets into his own revolution. And that check, that ridiculous, impossible, delusional check, it came true. Not because the universe magically delivered it, but because Jim Carrey decided it was already true, and spent 10 years working backward from that truth, until reality caught up with his vision. That's not magic. That's faith. That's commitment. That's the willingness to look insane until you look like a genius. Years after his father's death, Jim Carrey was asked in an interview if he had any regrets. He paused for a long time before answering. "I wish my father could have seen how big it got," he said quietly. "I wish he could have lived in one of those houses we used to imagine. I wish I could have given him everything." Then he smiled. That famous Jim Carrey smile that has lit up screens for decades. But you know what? He did see it. Maybe not all of it, but he saw enough. He saw me choose the dream, and that mattered more to him than anything else, because he knew what it cost to not choose it. The interviewer asked about the check, about whether Jim believed in manifestation, in the law of attraction, in cosmic ordering. Jim's answer was perfect. "I don't know if the universe was listening, but I was. That check made me listen to myself. It made me take myself seriously, and that's what changed everything." If this story moved you, if it reminded you of a dream you've been too afraid to chase, hit that subscribe button. Join our community of people who believe in impossible stories, who know that legends aren't born, they're built in the dark, when no one's watching, when everything looks hopeless. Where are you watching this from? Drop your location in the comments. And here's your real homework. What's your $10 million check? What's the dream you're too scared to write down? Share it in the comments, make it real. Because the moment you write it down, you've already started making it true. Until next time, Remember, you can fail at what you don't love. So you might as well take a chance on doing what you do love. That's not just Jim Carrey's story. That's your invitation. The check is waiting. All you have to do is write it.